The plight of Eritrean migrants has recently come to the world's attention, following news reports of mass casualty shipwrecks in the Mediterranean, as well as torture in the Sinai at the hands of human traffickers. Coverage of Eritrean migration has been shoddy and highly politicized at best, leading to much confusion on the issue and giving rise to questionable and often misguided policies by lawmakers in the wake of that confusion. Though migration into Europe has spiked for people of all nations, the focus has honed in on the case of Eritreans. According to the UN's refugee agency, UNHCR, 35,364 Eritreans applied for asylum in the EU in 2014. Sensationalized media reports have been quick to turn to Eritrea's domestic politics, with much of the reporting painting a picture of repression. Accounts like these have now come into question, as they are often written by misinformed journalists, sometimes quoting suspected traffickers for their perspectives on conditions inside Eritrea. These accounts are then used to present a human rights case against Eritrea. Emerging evidence suggests that there may be a loose network of state and non-state entities working together to smuggle and exploit Eritrean youth for monetary gain or political influence in Eritrean domestic politics. Eritrea's national service program has drawn much attention and criticism by the international media as the primary cause of emigration. The more extreme journalists and NGOs have even gone as far as calling the program slavery. Human Rights Watch made accusations of forced labor in 2013. The following year, legal prosecution was brought against mining companies in Canada, accused of participating in forced labor. During the 1970s and 1980s, multiple offensives and ruthless scorched earth policies under Ethiopian leaders Haile Selassie and Mengistu Haile Mariam led to large waves of emigration by Eritrean youth.
I would say that human trafficking is the worst manifestation of migration, and that migration is certainly nothing new to the Eritrean people. It's an issue that spans back to the 1960s.
Since then, migration has yet to cease. With the exception of a brief period of peace between the years 1991 and 1997, Eritrea has almost continuously faced aggression by Ethiopia, which has yet to lift its 1998 war declaration against Eritrea and is currently occupying Badme. During the war, ostensibly over the border, 80,000 Eritreans were forcefully expelled from Ethiopia back to Eritrea. In 2000, leaders of Ethiopia and Eritrea signed the Algiers Peace Agreement, calling for the cessation of hostilities. The agreement also called for an independent commission to provide a final and binding decision on Badme and demarcate the border to allow for the return of status quo ante.
When the delimitation decision actually came out in 2002 by the Border Commission awarding Badme to Eritrea, what happened was that Ethiopia refused to accept that agreement, that decision, and then took on an isolation strategy against Eritrea. This was not known to the world until 2010 when WikiLeaks came out with this.
The leaked American diplomatic cables from both Asmara and Addis Ababa are nothing short of shocking. In a classified cable sent on November 3, 2005, American Chargé d'Affaires Vicky Huddleston wrote from Addis Ababa,
Ethiopia cannot accept Badme as Eritrean territory, as doing so would compel Ethiopia to recognize that it was the aggressor when entering Badme during the 1998 hostilities.
She goes on to quote Joseph Lagwalia, the head of the UN peacekeeping mission in Eritrea and Ethiopia.
Prime Minister Meles has told him that Ethiopia's strategy was to isolate Eritrea and wait for it to implode economically.
The very next day, Huddleston sent another cable regarding a UN Security Council resolution that promoted peaceful demarcation of the border, revealing the US support for Ethiopia's strategy against Eritrea.
I assured him that the US was pressing hard to delay the resolution or modify it.
In 2010, another American Chargé d'Affaires in Ethiopia, John Yates, explained that Ethiopia was specifically targeting Eritrean refugees.
While it is commendable that the GOE continues to be willing to host refugees, The GOE, particularly ARRA, has strong political and financial reasons for doing this.
Perhaps the most surprising revelation came from Ronald K. McMullen in a cable entitled Promoting Educational Opportunity for Anti-Regime Eritrean Youth.
We intend to give opportunities to study in the United States to those who oppose the regime.
In terms of McMullen, we've been lucky. We've been able to obtain that information through the WikiLeaks cable. He probably never thought that he would be caught off guard with this, and he made those statements, which I think is very clear. That's one of the pull factor. And even Obama himself in 2012, he actually mentioned, our country by name.
I recently renewed sanctions on some of the worst abusers, including North Korea and Eritrea. We're partnering with groups that help women and children escape from the grip of their abusers. We're helping other countries step up their own efforts, and we're seeing results.
Dan Connell of Grassroots International gave an unusual speech to a small group of Eritreans in 2013 in Washington, D.C.
What's going to generate the most response from a wider public who is not familiar with Eritrea? And what would weaken Isaiah's ability to govern? I don't think you can organize a campaign for regime change. But you can organize campaigns that will make regime change more possible. The other one that I would certainly suggest is an end to unlimited conscription into national service. Partly because it is so easy to tie that together with so many other issues, the refugee issue, the trafficking issue.
So here you have a man who has not visited Eritrea since 2001, who just so happens to be the most cited source on Eritrea when it comes to NGO publications, international security organization publications, running the gamut from Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, ICG, you name it. And so he's basically saying focus on human trafficking for the reasons of bringing about regime change in Eritrea and making sure to campaign around national service. And this same guy is cited by UNHCR in official position papers frequently. And then you see today that national service is now all of a sudden coming to the forefront and constantly being linked to slavery. It's obvious what's going on here.
Through the campaigning of international NGOs like Amnesty International and regime change activists like Connell, supported by the United States, UN Special Rapporteur Sheila Keith-Aruth, a former Amnesty International employee, was appointed in 2012 to investigate human rights in Eritrea. Her work was then expanded to a 3-person commission appointed in 2014 that recently accused Eritrea of committing gross, widespread human rights violations.
My feeling is that they did not live up to the mandate. They changed the mandate to suit their purposes. She interpreted it as meaning you go ahead and prosecute Eritrea, the Eritrean government specifically.
I am an Eritrean. I want each and every Eritrean to have its freedom, to have its human rights. After all, the struggle for Eritrea was to ensure basic human rights of the Eritrean people. I mean, the ideals are still there. As I said when I talk about development, that is a basic human right. Providing clean water, access to electricity, access to education is a democratic right of people as well. But these things are not going to be perfect when you're living under artificially created situation. So if there is an intention to help Eritrea, then let's have a comprehensive solution to the Ethiopian-Eritrean border issue, first of all. Let's remove these ridiculous sanctions that are tantamount to declaring an economic war on a country that can least afford it, or on a country that least deserves it. But don't tell me whether you're repressing my country, you're committing collective human rights violations on a country, then you want to come in. Do you want to come in, check the problems that they have created, whether they're progressing or not? I mean, it's ridiculous to anyone who has a shred of intelligence.
One of the problems with Keith-Aruth is that she's statistically illiterate. She simply doesn't count anything. She doesn't count her own data. She complains endlessly about the fact that Eritrea has no statistical and demographic information, which is nonsense. We have plenty of statistical and demographic surveys. But of course, she wasn't allowed into the country. But still, she could get a lot of that information from the UN agencies in Eritrea and from the World Bank. The World Bank and the UN agencies have a lot of the information that's produced by the Department of Statistics. She tried to work with the UN agencies, and the UN agencies looked at her campaign, which was basically to denigrate, to incriminate the government of Eritrea, and they said, we're not going to collaborate with you.
I think this idea that Eritrea is using the border issue as an excuse to carry on repressing its people is an erroneous one. Ethiopia hasn't still lifted the declaration of war against Eritrea. The late Prime Minister Meles Zenawi publicly declared his intentions to carry out regime change in Eritrea, and to that end they have invested millions and millions of dollars, fabricated a lot of allegations, supported a lot of different groups, supposedly indigenous Eritrean groups, to destabilize Eritrea. All this constitutes an existential threat to Eritrea. So the suggestion that this is an excuse for the Eritrean government to carry on, apparently, supposedly to repress its own people, really is an insult to people's intelligence.
The national service is equal to forced labor.
All right, Shayla, stop
There's
here for a
torture
second.
which happens
Shayla,
in
stop
the
for a second, because
context,
it's a
and all this
conversation,
brings
not a
us
lecture.
to say
Shayla, just give me a moment.
All this is crime against humanity.
All right, Shayla, just give me a moment. It's not
there
to,
is
not
a possibility that
Shayla, give me a moment. There's
crimes
a 2
against
second
humanity
delay.
have
Shayla,
been
don't
committed.
talk over me. I need this to be a conversation.
Unlike Connell, who hasn't visited Eritrea since 2001, unlike Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, which vacated Eritrea in 2006, and unlike Sheila Keitharuth, the illegally appointed UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Eritrea, and former Amnesty International employee, who has yet to visit Eritrea, a growing body of journalists, foreign officials, and human rights entities that have visited Eritrea tell a markedly different story about conditions in Eritrea, the Eritrean National Service Programme, and the Eritrean government. Their accounts challenge the dominant narrative by groups like Human Rights Watch.
Many countries are saying we'll engage with Eritrea and see if we can help them resolve the problems or collaborate with them in matters of development. That is a healthy development. But what's in Keitharuth's program is simply to demonize the country and isolate the country as much as possible, with the hope that the government will collapse and will be replaced by a puppet regime.
In 2014, the Danish Immigration Service sent a fact-finding mission to Eritrea to look into the case of Eritrean asylum seekers in Denmark. It appeared to them that the persecution claims may not have been genuine, the numbers of Eritreans may not have been genuine, and so curious, they sent this mission. And this actually came in the wake of similar European efforts, such as Norway, where the deputy minister had noticed that 500 asylum seekers actually just went back and visited Eritrea, sparking his curiosity as to why asylum seekers claiming persecution would do that in that same year of claiming asylum in Norway. So the Danish mission sent their team to Eritrea, as well as Ethiopia, as well as the UK. And the findings of the report were landmark.
The findings of the report were groundbreaking. For the first time, an agency of a foreign government visited Eritrea and wrote an evidence-based report on the human rights situation there. This came in contrast with reports by Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, who did not visit Eritrea.
Right now, that whole campaign to demonize Eritrea is on very shaky ground, precisely because a big power in the world, European Union, has decided that they've had enough of this demonization. They've seen it. They don't buy everything that they're saying, and so they're going to initially, have a look at the information. The Danish report did that, and I read it, and it's an amazing document. They consulted with everybody, including UN agencies in country, in Eritrea, and so they have information which Keitharuth does not have.
We can't underestimate the totally exceptional position that UNHCR has taken towards Eritreans and the state of Eritrea. They released in 2009 and 2011 two position papers known as eligibility guidelines. And in these guidelines, they conclude that the entire state of Eritrea is the persecutor. Never in their history have they taken such a position towards any state, towards any peoples, basically making it a virtual necessity for Eritreans to flee Eritrea. And they get asylum, no questions asked, anywhere in the world at any time.
Asylum fraud using an Eritrean identity has become commonplace given the ease of obtaining asylum, especially in Europe. In a recent Voice of America interview, Bronwyn Bruton of the Council of Foreign Relations and the Atlantic Council highlights this point following a wave of shipwrecks in the Mediterranean.
When I hear a number of like 400 people on a boat, I have to suspect that at least some of those people were actually refugees from other countries, taking advantage of Europe's automatic asylum policy. If you're from Eritrea, or if you can convince a refugee officer that you're from Eritrea, you get an automatic green card in Europe, no questions asked. And that means that Sudanese, Ethiopians, Somalis, everybody has an incentive to walk through this open door from some of the poorest countries in the world to some of the richest countries in the world.
Human trafficking, in the simplest sense, can be defined as the exploitation of the smuggled.
The interesting thing about Musi and Meron is that they actually work very closely with Dan Connell. And Dan Connell is the person who said that human trafficking should be exploited for the purposes of bringing about regime change in Eritrea by linking it to national service. And so you have these three characters at a conference in 2009 on human rights in Eritrea, with U.S. State Department officials in their presence, EU officials in their presence, with the purpose of getting the EU to go along with American policy towards Eritrea.
1 month after the EEPA conference, Eritrea was sanctioned by the UN without protest from Europe. All three regime change activists now serve as the regular experts on Eritrean migration, blaming the Eritrean government for the shipwrecks in the Mediterranean. As one of their tweets indicate, every death of an Eritrean overseas is the fault of the Eritrean government.
Whenever an Eritrean dies, I blame Eritrean government for it.
Eritreans are fed up with their exploitation as part of politicized migration.
We need to cooperate and build a common front by fully implementing the United Nations Global Plan of Action on Human Trafficking.
The President has sent to the Secretary General of the United Nations an independent committee has to be established and to investigate this issue. This is a clear indication that the government is very committed to tackle and to combat this problem.
Though the trafficking of Eritreans has become a lucrative industry and appears to be part of a larger politicized migration scheme, there are some encouraging signs of hope. There appears to be growing international engagement with Eritrea and partnering to tackle global trafficking and migration. The recent Danish report appears to be a harbinger of things to come, with the UK Home Office's 2015 COI report specifically citing the Danish report and indicating that it no longer considers Eritrea's national service programme as forced labour.